Hello, everyone, and welcome to another broadcast of Identity and Culture, I think it's called, with me and Brian.
Hello.
Hello, everyone. We got lots to talk about. We want to talk about a little bit of the new European Andalusia, which I imagine will make Brian bang on about Bat-Yor again, as he does most weeks. But we wanted to start really with Tommy Robinson going independent, which happened about a week ago. But Brian and I got into the circumcision debate last week, so we never mentioned it. So let's talk about this. Tommy Robinson officially left Rebel Media, I think, on the 22nd of February, so it's just over a week ago. And Brian and Tommy are famously good mates. I don't know, you're certainly friends anyway. So have you got any background to this, Brian?
Well, Tommy... From his public statements and what I know also from the background is he felt a bit constrained. In fact, he put out a video last night where he laid it out. I think he said it quite well. He wanted to do more dangerous stuff, and Ezra was probably telling him to do less dangerous stuff. And that's it. You can't herd cats, and Tommy is a cat, and they've parted on good terms. So I think he's still going to be using he's going to do a few more videos for Rebel. He's going to use the studio that they started building, and but he wants to basically not have a boss. I appreciate that. I haven't had a boss for a while, and I don't like having a boss either. So I know my friendship with Tommy is just it's grown up over the years. But I know one thing is you can't tell him what to do. I mean, you just can't. So,
which is very good, really.
It is. And he's going to go wherever he wants and do whatever he wants. Now, look, the issue we all have on this side of thing is can you make a living, or can you do what he's doing in such a way that he doesn't have to then go and build houses, which is what is it? His original trade is he had lots of businesses back before the EDL, tanning salon and some other stuff. But he actually made a significant amount of money buying houses, doing them up with, as a builder and selling them on. And that's what he would go back to if he wasn't doing the media stuff. But, Rebel gave him a salary for a while and paid for the ancillary stuff because, to put out videos seems easy. You and I are doing something very easy here. This is the lowest rent form of video making that one could possibly do because Google's picking up most of the tab. But going around with a camera person, doing the editing, all of that stuff, it takes money because you've got to pay people. And not everybody does this as volunteers. So going independent, it just means he's got to replace with an income stream. The books give him some income, and good for him. He's going to do it. But I think there's another part to this, which is hugely important. Social media is going to be taken away from him. I think let's get on to that because there was a huge attack.
There's other things. The Twitter thing is the next thing, but I kind of want to discuss the reasons for leaving. As I mentioned before we went on air, Ezra Levant is kind of notching up not a great record on losing some of his star turns. And what made me think about this is obviously Lauren Southern left, then Faye Goldie left. I didn't know the reasons why Lauren Southern left.
Faith was got rid of because of the interview she did with.
Well, you see, this is where I'm interested in going. And then Kaylin Robertson left apparently for some kind of financial because he was blackmailing Ezra Levant apparently. But it seems to me that Ezra Levant and particularly the Faith Goldie situation, the reason why he got rid of Faith Goldie is he's got an editorial view where no man dare tread, and you know what we're discussing. The reason why he got rid of Faith Goldie is because, and this is what we were talking about also before we went on air, is Faith Goldie is getting too close to people who might have anti-Jewish sentiments. And I say this might have.
Well, not might. I mean, the Stormfront guys. She had I watched the video.
I haven't seen that video, guys. But I know she's hanging out.
She was hanging out with them, and it was not a journalistic interview. It was more of a just hanging out session. There wasn't really journalism in it. So, look, Stormfront. You know, maybe they're cartoonish Nazis, but they are, you know, self-declared Nazis in that, you know, they use all the Nazi symbolism and imagery and so forth. I don't get so worked up about that side of anti-Semitism when it's almost ridiculously overt, you know, because I get those memes thrown at me all the time, the gas chamber memes and so forth. I don't know why. It doesn't make me explode. Perhaps, you know, I just don't see it as the long-term threat to me or my people.
They're ridiculous, but we're already planning to talk about this more deeply in the future. But I suppose what Tommy's doing is he's being freed up from the restraints of not going where you're not supposed to go. I mean, I've got to know and got quite into a lot of alt-right material in the last few months. And as I said to you, as we were getting to the end of the circumcision debate last week, in many ways, Brian, it's you that's red-pilled me. I didn't start off even thinking about this. I lived in North London, so there are Orthodox Jews wearing their garb. But I'd never focused on. It had never even crossed my mind to think of Jewishness in the way that you put it, because we're having a conversation about culture and identity. It's inevitable that we're going to talk about this, and if we're friends, we have to be honest about this. But I'd never considered it in the terms that you obviously consider it.
Yeah. Well, look, okay, but back to let's see if we can close down the Ezra thing. I think what Ezra has tried to set up and has set up successfully and runs a pretty good operation as far as I'm concerned. You know, I subscribed for Tommy, but I'm now watching a guy called John Cardillo quite a lot, who's doing some great stuff from Florida. I like Sebastian Gorka's videos. There's other things on his channel that I like. I think the issue is, and it's the same with, you know, once somebody achieves a certain amount of I'll tell you, my favorite line is from my No Agenda podcast that I listen to every week, twice a week.
Yes, somebody applauded you for this the other day, actually.
Okay, you cannot monetize the network. And so this is the flaw in Ezra Levant's entire business model, unfortunately, which is that he's trying to monetize a network. The actual monetization is in the value that his stars deliver, the content that his stars deliver. So you can monetize Tommy Robinson. Tommy Robinson can monetize Tommy Robinson. Lauren Southern can monetize herself. And is there a huge value in being the network, which is what Ezra Levant is? I'm not so sure. And that we're at the cusp of these different changing models in media. And previously, the network was hugely valuable because the network was the method of distribution. So the network was the BBC. The BBC had this incredible infrastructure for taking programs, making them, and pushing them out. Today, the network, the infrastructure for pushing out the content is YouTube, and except when it gets taken away from us conservatives. So there might well be a future in monetizing the network, because Ezra Levant, what he does have that Tommy doesn't have access to now is Ezra Levant does have a method of getting videos out around YouTube. And around social media. So I think Ezra Levant's business model has a problem, which is you can't monetize the network. So as Lauren Southern became a big enough star, she became bigger than the Rebel, and she can do better on her own by raising money directly. And Tommy's going to be in a similar position. And people will back Tommy specifically, and they'll back Lauren specifically. Whereas giving money, and this was basically the argument that Kaelin had, giving money to the stable, to the network, to Rebel, struck KLM, I guess, as unfair or not very. You couldn't see where everything was going. It wasn't hypothecated. You know, people would give money for a Tommy Robinson appeal, but it would wind up paying the rent in Canada. So, I still have I've known Ezra a long time. Back when I first did Counter Jihad and counterculture podcasts in sort of early 2000s, Ezra was a guest on our show because he was fighting the Canadian Human Rights Commissions that were taking comedians to court and suing everybody left, right, and center. So I've known him a long time. I like the guy. He's trying to make a buck and get content that the mainstream won't touch out. There's always going to be disagreements at the margins, but the bigger problem is this thing of, is the network in the middle monetizable?
Yeah, I mean, this is what we're seeing, isn't it? Is the end of not even mainstream media, but anything moderately mainstream. We're living in a kind of rogue media world, and until it reinvents itself, then it's pretty much a free for all. You were gonna go on, because the next point, one of the reasons that woke me up to this was particularly Kaylin Robertson, because Kaylin Robertson, I thought, had fallen out with everyone, and I saw Kaylin tweet out that he announced that Tommy had been banned from Twitter for a week, and all the tweets would be going through his account. And all of a sudden I thought, well, Kaylin's still there. And then I also saw some photos with Kaylin and Lauren Southern together. So I thought, there's a little alternative gang forming here, and they seem to be dissidents. They're rebel media rebels.
Yeah. Listen, I think it's all pretty. It's all on good terms. So, the one thing that our side needs to avoid doing is infighting. Infighting is just the end of the world. If there are disagreements, they should be handled off screen, and I think that's largely happening. So I'm grateful for that. I think the bigger picture actually is that just as he's done this, I think that the authorities in Britain are really ramping up for a major attack on Tommy. And I think that the opening shots, the sort of testing the water, was the Darren Osborne trial. And then last week, and I think this is hugely significant, the Metropolitan Police Assistant Commissioner, Mark Rowley, who was apparently in charge of counter-terror for the Metropolitan Police. And the Metropolitan Police, just for sort of Americans listening to this, that's the police that cover London. But the British police is a kind of weird hodgepodge because they're all local, but then they have some national agencies that do national stuff like counter-terror. Anyway, this guy gave a talk at a pretty right-wing think tank, which I know quite well. I mean, when I lived in London, I went to a few of their talks, and he basically gave the most ridiculous speech. This soon-to-retire policeman, linking, again, reiterating what the court had said, that Darren Osborne, this guy who ran his truck into Muslims, was inspired by Tommy Robinson, and then presenting Tommy as the flip side of Anjem Choudhury. And Anjem Choudhury is a radical terrorist in prison for inciting terrorists. And there's no two ways about it. Britain's got all the hate speech laws it needs to lock people up. If Tommy Robinson has committed hate speech, such as he's incited terrorists, they would have locked him up by now. Yeah.
So actually, I want to add something. It's the continual demonization of Tommy Robinson, Britain First. What's strange actually is because of all the demonization. Now, when I read a newspaper report, if it says far right fascist, I think, oh, they must be okay.
Good guys. Yeah, me too.
And I don't know if you do watch my Way Forward, people, listeners out there, my Way Forward podcast on Sunday nights. But one of our regular contributor and good friend of mine is Mo Fayez, who's an ex-Muslim.
One of the earliest guys in the EDL. He spoke at very early EDL rallies a long time ago.
But he's been making fantastic contacts with politicians. I mean, he's a really important asset to the movement. He's a lovely bloke. I can stand by him 100%. But he's been making contact with Parliament, and he published a letter the other day from, I think it was from an MP. I'm not sure whether it was an MP or a member of the House of Lords, saying that they had found out that he had been speaking with Tommy Robinson and far-right fascists like this. And so as he was associating with this kind of people, he could expect no support from them from now in the future. And, I mean, it's closing down on any kind of democratic channel because, you know, Mo Fayez is of Pakistani heritage. How on earth can you? This is why it's important to have conversations with him and Nisa and other people and Shazia and other people that I talk to, because despite some of our differences in point of view, what we are forming an alliance to make things better. We know what our main enemy is at the moment. And it's important that we're capable of working together in order to defeat that enemy, because if we don't, then we're going to be well screwed.
Completely. It just doesn't. What they're doing is, look, I know this because I've known him for so long. Tommy is the one thing that could save Britain from an extreme blow up, because he's going to let the steam off. Everything he says is correct. In fact, I mean, to go back, the specific tweet that he was banned for was him saying that most convictions in the UK for grooming gangs are Muslim. 90% is the number he gave. Now, the number, according to Peter McLaughlin's website, is the only person who's done significant research and printed about this. I think at the moment his website stands at 84%. Quilliam came out with numbers around 84 as well %. So it's just the truth, but that's what's got him banned from Twitter.
Yeah.
And if you cannot say this, if you shove it under the table, there's going to be an explosion coming one day. There isn't. There already is. Darren Osborne was the first sign of an explosion because, you know, when he found out about grooming gangs, and he found out, according to his wife anyway, from the BBC drama, Three Girls, you know, he's inspired to go and do this nonsense, which Tommy condemns, I condemn, everyone condemns. You don't go driving your van into crowds of innocent Muslims. But
it's also the big problem.
Expression of this.
Yeah. Also, the big problem is the double standards. I think there were two cases around this at the same time. I mean, Darren Robertson, if I remember rightly, it was either 34 or 43 years. Some ridiculous sentence for. Obviously, he shouldn't have driven the van into a group of Muslims, but the guy was having a heart attack anyway, and that's why they were there. And it's not really proven that the guy that died as a result of the collision. Probably wasn't helped a great deal, I must admit. But two other cases of Muslims driving vans into people, and these sentences were around 4 or 5 years. So it's one rule for one group of people and one rule for another group of people, which is just a recipe for disaster. This is a time bomb set to explode. And this is why it's important to have people like Tommy talking out, and in many respects, you and me in our much more modest way, I think.
Well, look, but I think, the guy on one of the LBC presenters did at least point out the obvious, which is that if Tommy had a proper, a plumbing accent, like what I do, then, he'd be more regularly on the BBC and people wouldn't think he was a thug, but he talks like a thug. So they mark him as a thug. They've always done. And look, back in the original days of the EDL, I remember actually, funnily enough, I helped draft a press complaint about the Daily Mail, trying to push back on the term far right. I said, so I drafted it. It was sent off by people at sort of closer to Tommy at the time in their name. But we actually got into a dialogue with the editor of the Daily Mail. This is 6 years ago, and saying, why do you call the EDL far right? They've got gay members, they've got black members, they've got Muslim members, they've got Jewish members. What makes them far right? And the answer came back, well, everyone else calls them far right. And that was it. That was the only real answer that they could come to. And in the end, it ended with the managing editor saying that they would put a file note that the EDL objects to being called far right. But there was no justification for this, and there still isn't. There's still no justification for calling Tommy far right. You can't point to his views other than opposition of the Islamization of society. Other than that.
Somebody's asking me here, is the EDL dead? It's pretty much on its last legs. They've been banned from Twitter. I know some of the people in the EDL, and Ian Crossland, who I've interviewed, has stood down as leader. I suppose I ought to message him privately to find out exactly what's happened, but he's given up, and he was a kind of charismatic guy. Other people like Banksy, who I know aren't as involved in the EDL. So I've got no idea. I think they still exist. They might come back, but they're not looking very healthy at the moment. Another point.
I've not really paid much attention since Tommy left. Sorry, it kind of ended for me then.
Yeah, I mean, I know quite a few of the people who have been involved in the last few years. I know the press guys. Yeah, it's stumbling along not very healthily. The last point I wanted to bring up on Tommy was this video. I saw a video this morning that he'd done about a week ago about the 120 decibel people in Germany. And because this links in with everybody calling people a Nazi, and the 120 decibel girls went and protested a Me Too, a very posh Me Too media dinner, and they kind of got kicked out. And Tommy interviewed some woman afterwards, and she was saying, yeah, the reason, because of Germany's past, we don't want people like this because everybody it reminds us of the Nazis. And Tommy said to her, but you call them Nazis and therefore shut them down. And she admitted blatantly, yes, that's why I call them Nazis. So yeah. Even though migrants, and this is a million times worse than some girl in an office having her arse slapped by a lecturer's boss. We're talking about actual rapes here. But in Germany, girls don't, and in Sweden and in lots of other places, girls don't have the right to complain about being raped because they're going to get called Nazis if it's done by migrants. It's absolutely ridiculous.
There's no, yeah, well,
Yeah, enough said.
This is the double standard. We actually haven't spoken much about Islam, you and me.
Let's move on to that now, shall we?
Yeah.
Let's have a look at this article. See if I can share the window. Share the article. Is this sharing now?
Yeah, I see that.
Okay, good. This is an article that somebody sent me on Twitter this morning. Whoever that was, thank you, because it's what I woke up with, and I thought this is a good subject to talk to Brian with. This is from Jihad Watch, and here's the headline: Moderate Muslim professor Akbar Ahmed calls for new Andalusia in Europe. Akbar Ahmed, the Pakistani High Commissioner to the United Kingdom and Ireland, and the Ibn Khaldun Chair of Islamic Studies at American University, is thrilled about Todd Green's generous and brilliantly insightful review of his book, Journey into Europe. And in my comment this morning, Journey into Europe sounds very much like Hijra to me. And basically this book is a series of apologetics for being tolerant of Muslims in Europe and basically allowing them to take over. And the reason why I thought this was interesting is this whole new Andalusia idea. As I said at the start, this fits in with Batyor's idea of Eurabia. We know this is on the cards, but also it allows, because it's a reference to Al-Andalus, which is the Islamic empire in Spain that controlled Spain for between 500 and 800 years, then it allows me to kind of talk about dimitude and a little bit of Islamic history, really. Any thoughts on that, Brian?
Yeah, well, I mean, the bit that, if you go down a couple of paragraphs, the bit that Robert Spencer highlights, that bit in the middle, the dhimmi, as these covenanted peoples were called. Now, covenanted, that just means that they had a so-called agreement, but were granted religious freedom, not forced to convert. Look, it's quite simple, and you can understand everything about what's going on in Europe if you understand Batior's concept of dimitude. And it is Batior. She put it into the language. It actually came via Lebanon, but she told the Lebanese Christian guy to start using it, and that's how it got into the lexicon in English. But dimitude is death, conversion, or economic slavery. That's it. So when it says the dhimmi are covenanted people, were granted religious freedom, not forced to convert to Islam, Islam has never conquered by a kind of democratic majority method. Okay, so the idea is not that Muslims invade, achieve some kind of majority, because majority only applies or has any meaning in a democratic sense. No, they invade, a small minority take over by massive force and by imposing their will through the sword. And the society actually only works if that group of people, this small minority, are leeching off the majority. So they want them to remain as these dhimmis. They're economic slaves. They have to pay the jizya. They have to be humbled. They have to bow their head to the Muslim. They have to live under incredible conditions of servitude, basically to the Muslims. And the Muslims leech off their economic productivity. And this has been the history of every single Islamic empire. So it starts off, they invade, they take over, they don't actually convert or kill everybody. They leave most of the population working as these economic dhimmi slaves. And then they appear to be the rulers of this great and successful civilization, actually built on the backs of the non-Muslims. Yeah. Then over time, the conditions of dimitude force everybody slowly. They either convert, they die, they leave, and the place just putrefies and becomes a horrible swamp, because eventually when the number of non-Muslims drops, the number of dhimmis drop, the tax base disappears, the productivity disappears, and the place becomes a wasteland, as happened to every single Islamic empire. And so that's what this is.
And people get taxed into submission, basically, don't they? And I think this is the point here. People are very relaxed about the situation in Europe, but Europe is under a dhimmi economy pretty much, because the Muslims that are in Europe are leeching off the tax wealth. They're living. They're creating dhimmis out of the societies that they're in. And this is the whole danger. And this is the reason why you get called a Nazi and an Islamophobe for speaking out about this. And because they've wheedled their way into positions of power. The Labour Party depends on the Muslim vote. Obviously, there are a lot of very traitorous lefties, a lot of traitorous infidels and kuffar working for them for their own benefit. But this is the whole danger that Europe's in at the moment. And this is why we need to stand up and organise and actually get them out of power. Because they're creating a dhimmi societies, and it's very dangerous.
It's two things. It's not just the Muslims in power. It's the far left that helps them for reasons of their own. Now, I've got an article on.
Is there any more of this article that you want to look at or you want to mention? Or
no, I want to just draw another parallel, which is that, believe me, Jews are not immune to this kind of crap too. So every few years we have another peace plan comes out of Saudi Arabia, and Jews who don't understand dimitude and don't understand what Islam has planned for us, and that includes Israelis here too, especially the left, who don't understand dimitude. Always they come. Islam respects rights of Jews to live in dignity. Basically, ever since we created Israel, and in fact 100 years before before we created Israel. The plan in the Muslim world was you Jews, okay, we'll let you have a little dhimmi state. You can live here, but you must be dhimmis. You must pay the jizya just exactly as you used to Muhammad, and then we'll leave you alone, sort of. And that's the deal they always offer us. The Saudis offer us. It's every single so-called peace plan is dhimmitude, and they're offering the same thing to Europe.
I mean, the key expression here is live in dignity. No, they respect the right to live, but not in dignity. This is what's taken away by Islam, isn't it? They refuse to allow dhimmis to have any dignity whatsoever, and they specifically say that you have to shave the front of your head, and you are to be humiliated when you pay the tax. This is all where the rape gangs come in. It's the whole damn caboodle. I'm so sick and tired of it. I wrote an article this week about. This is not specifically Muslim, but it's like the cultural enrichment the fantastic cultural enrichment. What do we get? We get FGM, we get rape gangs, we get terrorism, we get acid attacks, all in return for a slightly better curries and a few takeaway kebabs. And
my favourite curry. When I lived in England, the curry that I went to in my local high street where I lived was a guy from Nepal, Gurkha, totally un-Muslim, and that was Himalayan Nepalese curry.
That's all right.
And that didn't have any Muslim.
That's definitely a kosher curry, isn't it?
Yeah, that was the. I mean, the Nepalese royal family with their Gurkha knives and stuff. And this guy was that was. And every year when it was the anniversary of his father's death, he would shave his head. What have the Muslims ever done for us?
Yeah, I didn't want to move too far away from the whole idea of the new Andalusia, actually, because this is Spain is definitely a target. I really recommend, if you haven't read it already, The Myth of the Andalusian Paradise, very much like in this book here, and also in the series of videos that I did about the golden age of Islam and how it's all a complete load of bollocks. As you were saying earlier, Brian, basically what the Muslims do is they take over the society and then they take credit for all the inventions and creativity and productivity of the people that were living there anyway. I mean, I get sick of getting into arguments. I think it's the Cordoba Cathedral, but Cordoba Cathedral was a grand mosque. And it was actually based on the Church of San Vicente. And one of the things that I've kind of got into over the last few years is understanding Visigoth history. Nobody knows about the Visigoths, but the Visigoths were in Spain prior to the Muslims. And the more I research them, and they're a forgotten period of history because they were there for a couple of hundred years between the Romans and before the Muslims got there. And basically they continued the Roman society, but they were from the north, so they were generally blonde. And everybody says, oh, the Visigoths had nothing. But the more you find out about it, the Muslims built their mosques on top of Visigoth churches. And the Cathedral of Cordoba, which the left here in Spain wants to return to being a multi-faith centre, fuck them. I'll buy a gun and go down there if that happens. I'm prepared to go and picket things like this. But the more I discover about it, because I was doing some research into medieval Catalan law recently, as is my wont. I'm a really sexy guy, as everybody knows. I'm interested in these kind of things, and it's I think it's called Rex Ludicorum. I mean, it's all based on Visigoth law, and I think we've spoken before that the Usachas de Barcelona, which is the proto-democratic document here in Catalonia, which very similar to the Magna Carta, but it predates the Magna Carta. The Magna Carta is 1212, I think, and the Usachas de Barcelona are 1174, 1175. So the European societies are moving out of feudalism into these proto-democratic societies. They're a long way from democratic yet, but it's all based on a compilation of of Visigoth law. I don't know so much about the Magna Carta, but it's very, very interesting to imagine what Spain would have been like had it not been invaded by the Muslims, because the Muslims came in 711 and 1175. It took the Catalans 1175 to get their shit together and in order to re-establish the rules of a society. And this was the time when they were kind of mad. Once you get attacked by Muslims, then there were bands of bandits and lesser nobles fighting skirmishes again on the borders. I mean, it's not the way to form a decent society. And it took about 200 years to sort this out. And one of my concerns is about this, and because I know about Spanish history, I mean, it has taken this, the Muslims were finally got rid of in 1492. That was when the Kingdom of Granada was finally thrown out of the Iberian Peninsula. In order to get Spanish society like back, and you still get bits of it when you speak to somebody from Andalusia, a Spanish person, Andalusia, there's something very Arab about them. The Arabs left their mark on Spanish society. Here in Catalonia, not so much. In Castile, not so much. In the north of Spain, not so much. But it's taken 500 years, over 500 years, to slowly get rid of the effects of Islam. And what are we doing? We're inviting them back again. And they have the gall to call Europe the new Andalusia. And I find it completely mind-boggling. Learn your history, folks.
Well, you also sent me one article from the one about Israel, and I mean, but it's kind of palpably obvious stuff to me, it's from an Arab writer pointing out, there's no such thing as settlements and occupation in Israel in the minds of the Arabs. The whole thing is occupied, same as Spain is former Islamic territory that is now occupied by non-Muslim Spanish people. And that's just the way they view the world. Once a part of the world has gone from being non-Muslim to Muslim, it should never revert. And Israel is one of the places that reverted back from Muslim rule. So did Spain. That's why they've always been targets, more sort of greater targets. Look, they can't quite claim that Britain was ever ruled by Islam, but that's just one graduated notch further. It's because the whole world must be ruled by Islam for their wonderful dream to be true. And that's it. The whole world and the moon, actually, and the stars does belong to Allah. And that's what they're working for.
Somebody's saying here, wake up, Simon. Daniel Stans, actually, who's a regular viewer I know. Wake up, Simon. You still think the Islam problem will be resolved by peaceful means. No, I'm actually very realistic about this. But it's not a future that I particularly wish for. If you listen to my conversations with Gavin Bobby in particular, we're talking about pretty much it's a pretty apocalyptic, the future that we see. But whilst there's some kind of hope, you have to fight for winning back democracy. You have to push for political control, because the alternative is really bad. And this brings us back to Tommy Robinson. And the reason why Tommy Robinson gets so vilified and called a fascist is because he's not advocating this future. I don't want this future because what I know, and particularly working class people who are living close to Muslim communities, who are going to be on the receiving end? Not the bastards that invited these people into the countries, but it's going to be working class people, the people that I love, the people that I come from, that are going to be getting it and being attacked with machetes and having your children raped. Look what's happening in South Africa, things like this. This is the reality that we're expecting, and we will need to fight. But whilst there's the chance of some political effort making some kind of change, I think we've got to push for it. And part of my effort is not only in the UK. I'm talking to lots of people in the UK. Tonight, I'm on Rocking Mysteries Philoso Chat podcast, and we're going to be talking about European politics. but part of my theories is ethno-state isn't the right word. But I kind of appreciate it, it's safe zones. I think what we need to do is we need to get zones that are solidified and securely Christian, Western, democratic.
Western chauvinism. Yeah. I'm okay with Western chauvinism. I'm okay with the assertion of laws that are talking about proper equality of opportunity, not equality of outcome, but proper equality of opportunity. And just outright banning or making it difficult to observe those parts of Islam that are political and public in nature. There should not be public expressions of Islam. Now, there isn't much public expressions of Judaism in the West, so I don't see why you would consider that. I think that there should be public expressions of Christianity. I think the church bells should ring whenever they want to ring them, because that's the nature of that's the society. Honor your traditions, hold on to them, but do not allow, in the interests of some kind of ridiculous equality, do not grant Islam the pedestal that it has been put upon, and not to prosecute people for rape gangs because you're scared that they're brown and that you'll be seen as a racist if you do.
But this is what I believe. I think we're still applying true equality and equality before the law with no favoritism, because this is what we were talking about earlier, that we're living in this dhimmi society where it's one rule for Muslims, it's another rule for the indigenous white population. If it's one rule for all, then we'll end up winning. And I know I'll get accused of being some kind of white nationalist and supremacist. No, but I really believe that we're better. I love this society that we've created. Look at Gothic churches, look at the art, look at the literature, look at the political systems. It's ridiculous not to love this. So it's no kind of mad jingoism. It's the reason why I got involved in this, because I was writing about Qatar history and culture, which I'm still doing, is because I sincerely love it and I believe in it, and the truth will out, because something this good can't be allowed to fall as long as the rules that are applied equally. And at the moment, that's not what's happening. So we need to keep up with the political fight, and we need to push those dominoes down. We need to create those safe places. And FGM I was talking about, anyone discovered with a child who was born in the UK or has been tested in the UK not to have been mutilated as a child, if they're mutilated, parents ejected, imprisoned, deported, fucking well got rid of. We don't do that in these societies. Bugger off, back to Somalia. I don't care if everybody suffers, because by applying laws in this way, you make it increasingly difficult. People won't believe that they'll be able to get away with what they think they can get away with. And I still believe, and with my friendship with people like Mo Fayez, I'll mention again, there's the possibility of driving a wedge between the fundamentalist committed Muslims who really want jihad and they want Sharia law, and the people like Mo who recognize, and many other people who recognize the advantages of living in Western society and living in a Western society under democracy, not under Sharia. And I think there's more and more people of this who think like this. So it's worth committing ourselves to fighting to try and make this possible. That's my opinion, basically. But if it comes to a fight, I'm probably too old by now. But don't worry, I've got some kitchen knives and a baseball bat, and I'll be down on the street.
It does come to a fight. It comes to a fight here in Israel almost every day. I mean, they never stop trying to attack us. Gun control here represent almost every weekend. We see another tweet from the IDF of the guns they found over in the disputed territories at the weekend. Sort of digging around in Arab gardens. It's a fight. I don't think it'll ever stop. And this is the thing: is that I don't think we should expect peace with if you have to live with Muslims. But the disaster of the West has been to invite. They invited them. I mean, Merkel just flooded the country. And but I saw it. That's why I left in 2000. I was out of the UK by 2007, properly out in 2009. I knew what was coming because I could see it. And I could see what they were going to do to their society to bend over backwards to it. Got to stop it. Stop.
I mean,
make the public expression of Islam unpleasant in the West. And the thing is, I don't know whether it's too late. I don't know whether there's a way you can encourage people to leave fast enough.
I mean, this is the position that distinguishes me from the alt-right, really, because I'm not so concerned because I live here in Spain. I'm not so concerned about the idea of ethnic purity. You can obviously see the traces of the Muslim influence in the color of the skin of the people, in the olive. These people are obviously Mediterranean, but basically it's got to be, and we're kind of getting back to Inquisition time. And the problem with things like the Inquisition is you start going down this nasty road and it tends to get out of hand. But it's basically either convert or get out, become a citizen like everybody else, or get lost. And to a certain extent, our societies have got to be completely intolerant with all of the aspects of Islam that we find intolerable. And that many of those, halal meat is another example. No, you cannot eat halal meat anywhere. Let's completely make it illegal. Girls should not be allowed to wear hijabs at school under a certain age, I imagine. FGM, things like this. Controlling of, no, you can't.
Polygamy.
Polygamy is another thing. It's the strict application of the law.
It's supported by British law now. In that, if you have your multiple marriages abroad, they'll even give you bloody money. They'll give you benefits for your extra wives. It's insanity.
Yeah. Which makes me think that, or it makes it very obvious that the establishment is colluding with Islam in order to beat down the indigenous populations. And I still think there's time. I don't know if you've been. I mean, one of the optimistic pieces of news, really. I don't know whether we talked about this last week. Is Gerard Batten becoming interim leader of UKIP, and my friend Richard Inman, not one of the leaders, not the founder of the Vets Against Terrorism, but probably the loudest voice, he won't mind me saying this, of Vets Against Terrorism. But he's encouraging people to join UKIP, and I've got nothing against Anne-Marie's For Britain party. That's great. I think there needs to be as many parties as possible fighting for this. But the important thing about UKIP, and basically, having spoken a lot to Richard about this, I'm not over optimistic about UKIP as it stands. But if thousands and thousands of people join UKIP, Gerard Batten becomes permanent leader, because Gerard won't stand for the leadership unless he sees that changes are happening. Now, if changes are really happening in the party, then he will be elected leader, and this will be an important party, a major party, in a way that for Britain, it's going to take for Britain ages to get to this stage. But UKIP have whack. And even if they don't become the government, in the same way as they did with Brexit, they'll put Islam and controlling the Islamization of Britain firmly on the political agenda. And they'll push, because as soon as this happens, the Tories start to get shit scared and realise they're going to have to adopt some of UKIP's policies. We've got the first past the post system in Britain, so you have to affect the policies of one of the major political parties. I don't know about you, but I'm not very optimistic about Corbyn and company. So if you believe that there's some kind of possible political change, then you've got to do it somehow. And I hope he doesn't get angry with me for saying so, but I tell you, if Richard stood I'd vote for him. And in fact, I'd come back to Britain and register where he was standing, because like Richard's a great lad. He's not in politics at the moment, not officially, but politics needs good, honest, upstanding people who put the interests of normal working class people first, and people who've got a good background, people you can trust. And I know him well enough to know that he's not going to be. He's incapable of selling out this bloke.
I'll tell a little story about Gerald Batten, because my involvement with counter jihad goes back a very long way. So the reason Gerald Batten's very, very important and interesting to me is that this is really down in the weeds of the whole counter jihad movement. But in 2007, there was quite an important gathering in Brussels of some of the earliest counter jihad people. And
yeah, you sent me that article, actually.
Yeah. So I'll just, and we had people like the Gates of Vienna guys, Ned and his wife, and Pamela Geller showed up.
Geert Wilders was there.
Robert Spencer was there. Geert Wilders was there. Batia Orr actually gave her Eurabia speech. This was shortly after the book Eurabia had been first published. And she gave a Eurabia speech, and we held this meeting in the EU Parliament building in Brussels. And the reason we were there was because we were sponsored by Gerard Batten, who was a UKIP MEP. And he was the one that allowed it. It was recess period. It was October 2007. And so there was the Parliament, it was booked. And I don't think, it's funny, this must have sort of happened before anybody knew what this movement was. So we had this meeting, and people came from all over Europe, names people who are still doing good stuff. Elizabeth Sabadich-Wolf from Austria, and she's now, I know she's working behind the scenes with the people in Austria still. And Gerald Batten sponsored it. So it was only able to happen where it was because of him. And there was one other UKIP guy with him, I can't remember who, but he had been working with this chap, Sam Solomon. And I think prior to this, they'd come out with their document on, what was it called? I've got it somewhere. But this is now what he's being attacked for, and he did that great Sky News interview because he's held these views about Islam for a long time. They're solid. He really knows what he's talking about. This is not like he didn't pick this up last week.
No, he's
for a fact.
In 2006, 2007, I wrote an article about him a few days after he became interim leader. And he actually wrote the introduction to what was something by Sam Solomon.
That's it. The War Against Jihad, Understanding the Adversary. Proposed Charter of Muslim Understanding. Okay,
the proposed Charter of Muslim Understanding is very, very important and a great idea. And this is an idea that really should be recuperated, I think, it's a series of articles which Sam Solomon wrote, which draw on Quran quotes and Hadith quotes.
Let me just tell you who Sam Solomon is.
Just let me finish. Just let me finish what it is, and then you can say who Sam Solomon is. And basically, there are a series of articles that show where Islam could be consistent with secular democracy. So peace and not proselytizing, and there's about 23 articles. And the idea is to get all Muslim organizations in Europe to sign this. If it really is a religion of peace, then it's a religion of peace. And they sign this and promise to conduct their religion along these lines, which would bring it into the ambit of Christian religions or the non-proselytizing religions, Judaism, Hinduism, that leave people alone, basically. Go ahead, sorry, Sam Solomon.
Okay, so Sam is a former madrasa teacher from Pakistan. This has lived with me from this day. At this 2007 conference by the way, this is the introduction of this document with the foreword by Gerald Batten. Sam Solomon at this event, he gave this talk about Islam, and I remember, and he doesn't read the Quran. He literally knows it forwards and backwards. He can start with the final. He can recite to you every verse of the Quran in Arabic, both directions. It's unbelievable. And when he read some verses, and one of the verses that stuck with me was the verse that contains the phrase Hezbollah, which means party of God. And it was the first time I'd heard it said in Arabic, and it's bone chilling. And I thought, and suddenly in my mind it connected, Hezbollah, the party of God.
Well, yeah.
I started to hear the Arabic because Sam Solomon was reading this stuff to us or reciting it to us. Anyway, he was a madrasa teacher in Pakistan, teaching kids the hatred in the Quran, and he flipped and actually became, as far as I know, to this day, he's quite a devout Christian. But like I say, this is the foundations of some of the counter jihad that we've got in the West. It's not a very big crowd. To this day, it's still not a very big crowd. We were all based on the work of Bak-Yaor, she's fundamental to all of this. But everything that was said there was sort of valid and is valid today. The trouble is, I think the audience has got bigger. I think more people are woke to this kind of stuff, but I don't know whether we can affect political change. That's the point. And I mean, the point was UKIP never adopted this kind of talk on Islam under Farage or anyone. They focused on the Brexit thing. They went after Brexit, and I think to their own massive detriment. For example, they spoke about immigration, but I've always been keen, and this makes the alt-right hate me. I've always been keen, like you, not to worry so much about assimilated immigration, people coming to a new country and wanting to fit in and wanting to follow their customs and wanting to be an expression of what's all great about the country they've come to. I've worried about the Islamic immigration that never fits in, that always attacks the host.
Yeah, I mean, we've discussed this before. I take a harder line than you. I openly describe myself as a pragmatic ethno-nationalist. And what I mean by that is I would like in the indigenous peoples, be they the English in England, the Catalans in Catalonia, the Italians in Italy, I would like the indigenous peoples to dominate. I think you can have some flexibility with the amount of people from other races before they start to tip the balance and influence the indigenous culture detrimentally. People have other sets of interests, and there's also the race realist argument. People are genetically different. The reason why I call myself pragmatic is because this has happened. We've had 50 years of this now. I've talked about Spain. I live in the Mediterranean. I know that this can be overcome. It will probably take 500 years to return to have a relatively homogeneous culture and ethnicity. Ethnicity is much broader than simple genetics. I think ethnicity is a combination of things. So I think the best way is to avoid violence. And there's a kind of rollback of problems. I consider Islam to be the main problem. Mass immigration is a relatively less important problem. So I think you have to take a pragmatic approach, particularly given that some of our potential allies, such as Sikhs, Hindus, members of the West Indian community, against Islam, are in our countries. It seems like a bad idea to be fighting amongst ourselves when we've got a major enemy in common, basically.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, Gavin Bobby. Hi, Gavin. Really would be nice. We have to have a proper chat soon, Gavin. Gavin says, should a future lawful authority pursue humane repatriation of UK's Muslim population, can you and Brian please explain why this would be too extreme and that we simply need to pull our socks up?
Well, I didn't say it was extreme. Listen.
I think that Gavin and I hadn't developed my ideas last time we spoke on this. But I think, I think financial incentives for people to return, and I don't massively see the problem with humane repatriation. Actually defining what humane repatriation is, I don't have that much problem about it. And as I say, I'm taking a more strongly ethno-nationalist line. I think Britain or England is English and belongs to the Celts and Anglo-Saxons, and they should definitely dominate. And the people who really, really don't fit in, I think there's a process of incentives where, you know, just imagine if you've had an education in the UK, you can't be who you want to be, but you can get a big whack and go back to whatever country your grandparents came from and set up your own business. And each member of your family has an amount of money to invest in some kind of business or venture in Pakistan or wherever that may be. You can set up a life with a great deal of advantages. I don't see why that kind of solution couldn't be sold as a good alternative to people, because as society ruptures increasingly, it's going to be one thing to be poor and in a really failing community in cold Yorkshire than it is in much warmer climes. So I think those options should be given. What you actually mean, Gavin, by humane repatriation, we'd have to knock that out because it's a very broad term. But in principle, I don't see any problem with it. I don't know what you think, Brian.
Look, I'm broadly in favor of reducing the amount of Islam in the public sphere in the West, and that whether it can be done, whether I don't see any natural way it's going to happen. I don't see Islam dying out. But I think it should be challenged mercilessly. It should be mocked mercilessly. It should be allowed to mock their prophet endlessly. And if that makes them uncomfortable and want to leave, go and leave. And yeah, I'm also in favor of economic incentives to make there be less Islam in Western societies. I support it here in Israel too. You know, I'd rather see people move to Jordan. If they want to be strongly Islamic and anti-Jewish, go away. Just go away.
Yeah, I mean, I really think, and I think you go a long way, but this is the whole question is, can we get the political climate changed to such an extent where laws are applied equally to and against aspects of Islam and Sharia? This is the problem. We need to make a political turnaround in order to make it the environment unconducive to people who want to practice Islam. You want to practice Islam, go and do it somewhere else. If this is really so important to you, this is not the place for it. I think that needs to be imposed. But if it's difficult to just apply the law, how are we going to get any political party to put forward humane repatriation? I think we're a few stages away from that yet.
Yeah, we're many stages. Look,
yeah.
You know,
I mean,
the great unanswered question of the West at the moment.
I mean, we're about to close now because it's 11:33. We've been going on for just about an hour, and this is my issue with the alt-right as well. Is my fundamental question is, without some kind of political influence, how are you going to put these policies that you have into practice? It's either fighting or the political solution. If I'd been 30, if I was 30 now, I might be up for the fighting. But as I'm 58, and no, they're not false teeth, folks. They're my teeth. They might be a bit knackered, but they're all mine. Yes, I'm 58, so I think we've got to look for political solutions. And whilst there's hope, we have to be having conversations like this, I believe.
Correct. All right.
Well, that'll do it for this week. So that's been me and Brian. Who knows what we're going to talk about next week? So it's good morning from me.
And good morning from him.
And we'll see you next week, and I hope you enjoyed that. Bye-bye for now.